Hey everyone, Sloan here, and oh boy, am I excited for you to listen to this episode. We have a conversation with the excellent Joachim Klement, who is the author of the popular Clement on Investing Substack, and also just a homie from small times and from my career back at the CFA Institute. He's been he was involved in the research foundation there for a very long time, and now just sort of publishes this daily newsletter that is about as brilliant as newsletters can be, in my humble opinion. Our conversation was extremely wide ranging, but still incredibly tangible. We talk about the structural differences in growth between Europe and the US, differences in innovation and industrial policy, how the media coverage landscape affects financial markets, particularly as it relates to small and mid cap companies. And then, we really spent a lot of time talking about this sort of bugbear of his, which he wrote a series of articles about, where there are these people who he has dubbed Cassandras, or kind of negative ideologues, let's call them, who've managed to gather tons and tons of attention by just making these really irrational and deeply negative forecasts. So we talk about that. We talk about why kind of bears always seem so smart and bulls always seem so dumb in the investment market. And then we close out by talking about the concept of financial innovation and where he sees financial innovation going in the future. Really, really amazing conversation. On top of that, believe it or not, that's so much value there already. We've got even more free money for you. On the top of it, Ashby and I do our usual banter where we, kind of go over what's going on in our lives and in the the broader institutional investment market. And then, as always, we take questions from you at the very end. If you are interested in asking us a question in an upcoming episode, go ahead and send us an email, freemoneypod@gmail.com. And while you're at it, why not leave us a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice? That is it for me for now. You'll hear plenty more of my voice in the upcoming couple minutes. Take it away, Sharkbait.
Ahoy, Free Money Podcast listeners! I'm Sharkbait Buckley, the Disclosure Pirate, and I'm here to set you straight about what's going on with this here show. Sloan Ortel is a spreadsheet wench that works for Invest Vegan LLC, a Utah-registered investment advisor, and the Woodcash Public Benefit Corporation. Yar. Ashby Monk is a sea dog that works for Stanford University. And KDX, when he's not minding the binnacle on the poop deck of this here man o' war. All opinions expressed by either Sloan or Ashby are entirely their own, and do they reflect the opinions of their crew and or any company. Clients of Invest Vegan may maintain positions in securities and strategies discussed in this podcast. Advisory services are only offered to clients or prospective clients where Invest Vegan and its representatives are properly licensed or exempted and a client agreement has been executed. Yar.
Here comes the money.
Here we go. Money talk.
Here comes the money. Money, money,
Dollar.
Welcome to the Free Money Podcast. Oh my gosh, it's the Provo Palo Alto conversation about institutional investing you desperately crave. Ashby, you're fresh back from the school drop. Does that feel like you're running from an explosion, like when you drop the kids off at school?
My lord, I'm recalibrating. What you don't realize about the school drop off is the traffic associated with the drop off. We did purchase the bicycles for the kids to drive themselves to the schools. But you would be shocked, Sloan, to hear that my kids are quite manipulative at getting me to do the drop off, even though I've not only purchased the bicycles, Sloan, I also purchased the telephones to go with the bicycles. That was the deal. You ride your bike to school every day, you get the mobile phone. Ask me how often that happens. Not enough.
I remember from when I was a kid, that was one of my favorite things to do, was trick my parents into driving me the 45 minutes to school.
Yeah, exactly. And like the school, it's a middle school, is literally like 1.2 miles from our house, so they could practically walk it. But to drive there and back takes almost 40 minutes. So
I mean, like in yet another masterful segue, this is like another reason why I'm getting more and more bullish on e-bikes, over EVs. I drive, the Wood Cache electric truck. It's phenomenal.
cool.
It's like, causing me to neglect my beloved Toyota Highlander because we have this like brand new Ford F-150 all the time.
And it's electric.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, it's like a
That's
pickup truck that
badass.
handles like a sports car.
Yeah.
But if you're not hauling millions of tons of wood around,
No.
hard to come up with a reason why you want it. And the e-bikes get you right out of the traffic.
The e-bikes are so interesting. First of all, e-bikes kind of undersells what they are. They're motorbikes.
Yep.
Okay. I see kids going faster than me in the bike lane now. Like, it's quite a trippy thing to be driving along and have a bike pass you faster than you're going in the bike lane.
Yep.
Because they go like 35,
Yeah. Or
And
I think 29 in some states. Like
really?
above 30, they can't. They're in a different class.
I used to have this joke I would tell about what a trip before e-bikes were a big deal and they were just first hitting the scene, and you would be driving along and you would see some, like, call it 65-year-old woman sitting quite vertical on a bike, like, so, like, not really in the, like, down in the haunches, but like sitting quite vertical and doing like 28.
Yep.
And you would be like, what the hell is happening right now? Is this like a superhuman? And then you're like, oh, this is that e-bike thing.
I feel like it's yet another reason that like investors should pay attention to labor relations and working conditions, because like the delivery guys in every major city have been 15 years ahead of like every investor person
Hundo.
On the EV thing, right? Like they've always had this. They're like, yeah, whatever. And like in the market, people are just figuring out that maybe the future is not 100% Tesla.
No. Definitely not.
And thank God for that.
I did want to just plant the seed here off the top before I get into the news. Do I have time to plant seeds and do news?
I think you got time. You got time for news and
all right,
seeds.
we can leave the guest lurking a minute.
He is notoriously punctual and organized, and we can roast him for that when he shows up.
Oh, beauty.
Yeah.
Fabulous. I like making fun of people for being on time.
Yeah, for being really kind and like showing up and considerate.
So you and I are organizing an awards show.
That's true.
First annual free money awards show in which we are going to grant awards, some real, some otherwise, to products, people, some other P word out there. I don't know. But I wanted to tell you, we've been drafting our list of awards, and I just thought of one on the drive here.
Ooh.
Okay. It's you remember in the Old Testament we talked about fire and brimstone?
Yep.
Okay. Fire and brimstone. We've got a lot of investment people worried about fire.
Yep.
What happened to brimstone? Okay.
Brimstone risk, yeah. Like people are neglecting brimstone risk.
Yeah, and frankly, I had to Google what it was at the stoplight, and it was like, oh, it's like sulfur or some shit. I don't know, but it's like terrible smelling smoke. That's brimstone.
Oh my gosh! Well, that really is what kills you in the fire. I mean, like out here in the West, half of our most dangerous air pollution is the particulate matter that comes from fires, which I guess we could call brimstone.
We could, because I'm thinking you and I, our next free money business is to build a brimstone data business. And we can pretend quite sincerely that we are helping investors manage that. Or it could be a category in our upcoming awards show for most niche alternative data product.
I mean, because I do think that is a real proliferation of categories, right? Where like for the longest time, like if you were a niche insight provider, You didn't start a fund or a strategy. You started a data product,
You did.
right?
You sold data to Citadel or Millennium.
Yeah,
You
because
know?
there's no way to like make that do anything other than be a data thing.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, we had the fish farm data platform, Scoot Science, on this
Yes, we
platform not too long
did.
ago.
So I figure we'll go out, we'll find some nominees, and listeners, if you can think of some crazy, wacky data that you use, send it our way. All right, speaking of
just
use.
to preview the categories that we've got in this award
yeah,
show,
hit
which
us.
is next week. I mean, we've got among other things, outstanding contribution to bullshit, which should be a really competitive category this year. We've also got and I'll just say one more. We've got the Saddest Billionaire Award, which I think is another tightly competitive category this year.
I think we previewed that last week.
Oh, that's
maybe.
right.
We talked a little bit about a certain sad billionaire who's so sad.
It must be so hard. But yeah, and you can send us an email at freemoneypod@gmail.com with any question that's on your mind, or commentary on the awards, nominees, whatever. Just take it as an invitation. Tell us.
You could also just send us people that you think need awards, and we will craft the category.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
It's a little bit like Jeopardy. All right. Great segue.
Yep,
Into
always.
The news, Sloan. Into the news. This one is just for fun. I don't normally present the annual returns of the big investment organizations. Sloan, I am a long-term investor and thinker, so these annual returns usually don't rise to the level of news, except when it sets a record for the absolute most return ever achieved by an investment organization.
Talk about Citadel here.
Yeah. Kill me. Norway's giant pension fund, their annual return was $213 billion.
Fuck.
Single year investment performance is as big. That's the performance.
That's like 2 Temaseks.
It's at least 1 Australian super. So I just thought I would let like when these funds get big, they get real big. And it's such a big return number that you're like, man, what happens 20 years from now if it keeps compounding like this? Like, it's huge. Anyway,
and that's already inspired some really interesting thinking. Like organizations like that already sort of go, all right, well, we own the whole market. How do we think about improving the quality of the whole market?
Right.
And like I think really important for listeners to understand that there's a lot of fascinating stuff that goes on under the hood at these organizations. I was talking to a Canadian last week, and going like, hey, the most interesting jobs in your country are in the pension sector, and they were like, what? Like trying to get a 7% return. And I was just
come
like,
on, dude.
come on, use your imagination, brah.
Okay, so look, I feel obligated to transition perfectly into this next story about Canadian pension plans. Most of this is related to our ability to transition from one topic to the next.
Exactly.
One Canadian pension plan in particular, for my next bit of news, has announced that they will be merging, and this is the CDPQ, Caisse de Dépôt et Consignation de Québec. Allez!
Allez!
They are going to be merging the core pension fund with their real estate entities, bringing Ivanhoe Cambridge and Otera Capital back in under the mothership, which is the beginning, perhaps, of the end of an era where these Canadian pension plans would build arm's-length real estate platforms, infrastructure platforms, which we called at one point captive GPs because they were wholly owned, 100% owned. But CDPQ claims it's going to save $100 million per year by bringing this in. And they say part of the reason they're doing is they're moving away from the kind of development / like operating into more traditional investment functions. And so you just don't need a huge workforce, to go and just do regular investing. But I thought that was interesting.
That is really so. So that's a departure from like the vision of infrastructure investing or real estate investing, where they go into less developed countries. They stand up a new highway or something like that. They would be buying an existing highway in this case.
They would.
Yeah.
So in these organizations, so Ontario Teachers has something called Cadillac Fairview, I believe.
Ooh, that's a great name.
And Omers has Oxford Properties. And so these are entities that are arm's length, so they can recruit really wonderful talent into them. But they're still owned by the pension funds. And so it was an organizational experiment. And this is a big development because it kind of signals that experiment may not have worked as some of us thought it was.
I mean, well, yeah, or maybe that the building a highway in a less developed country is inherently a pain in the ass.
True.
And it's like not something you can just solve with a governance mechanism.
That's right. Yeah, you still have to go and do hard work.
Yeah.
Last news. This one is coming us to from we're the two. They're from Australia. It's Raf Arndt. Raphael is the chief executive officer of the Future Fund. He apparently has a new chairman today, but that's not the news I want to share with you. He made a quote that said, "It's become more clear that the recession is less and less likely to happen, particularly in the United States, which is the dominant market."
Oh man, what a segue! What a
Is
segue!
it?
Yeah. I don't even know if you know.
I don't think I do know. I just got out of the car.
Let's get our guest in here. Joachim, thank you so much for waiting in the waiting room for 15 minutes. Sorry to keep you hanging out in purgatory.
Oh my gosh, sorry
no,
about that.
Don't worry.
I mean,
Yeah, it was purgatory. It was, what was it? Like kind of the 6th or 7th circle of hell, something like that.
Yep. Was there brimstone there? Fire? Was there fire and brimstone? Because we were just talking about how brimstone is not a category of data.
But what there is a fireplace. Unfortunately, it's not heated at the moment. So
Where are you right now? Where in the world
you actually get a nice view of my living room.
Okay,
so you're coming from London, yeah?
I am coming from London, yes. I was working from home today, which coincidentally was not my choice because we just had another train strike today. So getting into the office was tough enough.
We just we just had a phenomenal segue by accident, which I think is really a tradition here, where Ashby was talking about how the someone had said that recession fears are over, especially in the U.S., which is the dominant market.
Thank you. I'll show myself out now. Okay.
This is the CEO of Australia's Future Fund saying that the recession is less and less likely to happen in the U.S. So that.
But meanwhile, in the EU, it looks like you guys have sort of implemented or I guess we can't really call London the EU anymore, but
Nope.
It certainly looks like the EU. Yeah. Well, it's whatever. It's a peculiar island. But it certainly looks like, the region, the EU, the UK is less dynamic and even almost like in an intentional degrowth phase. What the hell is going on?
Oh, well, tons. Where can I start? No, I mean, in terms of degrowth, I think that's a bit harsh on us Europeans and Brits.
Okay.
The fact is that there are certain structural differences between Europe and the US that just kind of create lower growth. And number one is we tend to have less immigration than you guys have in the US. And that means that we have an older population and we're losing people left, right, and center out of the workforce. And without workers, it's a pretty tough gig to grow the economy. Yet, just like in the US, the debates here politically are all about curbing immigration and having less immigration, not more. To which I typically say, well, a country like Germany would actually need about 400 to 500,000 immigrants each year just to keep the labor force constant.
Wow.
And
It's a lot of immigrants. I mean, I would guess that they're doing 10% of that. I mean, I actually just
Well,
putting that,
actually,
you
they
know.
did for a while. They did an awful lot. So 2015,
Okay.
16, when we opened when the Germans opened their border to the refugees from Syria and the Middle East, they took in 1 million plus in
Oh,
1
wow.
year.
Okay.
And then again, they did the same in 2022 with Ukrainians coming into the country. But other than that, apart from these kind of one-off instances, they're doing way less than what they need. And so the
Interesting.
result is there are fewer and fewer people in the workforce, more and more old people. We've got massive, massive labor shortages, particularly in healthcare. And that's only getting worse. And that's just kind of means that there is less growth there. And then the other thing is that we Europeans tend to be really, really good in the stuff that has less growth than what the Americans are good at. I mean, Ashby, you are sitting in Silicon Valley, or as close as makes
I
no
am.
difference.
I am.
So European tech. Well, yes.
Name a European tech company. I'll wait.
SAP, brilliant
SAP,
company.
yes.
Oh man, yeah.
ASML.
Well-known-
Without ASML, all you guys in the Silicon Valley would just be non-existent.
We're ASML shareholders at Invest Vegan. I love that company.
Yeah, no, ASML is
but
brilliant. So is
but
SAP.
they're the unsexy. I mean, SAP
Mm.
certainly is not a
Exactly.
sexy tech
It's-
company.
Exactly. And when we do innovation, we do it in the kind of old industrial style innovation. We're really, really good. I mean, the Germans in particular, but also you can go to the UK and France and everywhere. There are really good, innovative industrial companies. But anything that is kind of 21st century tech, we're struggling.
It's interesting you say that, because I was just looking through, I'm doing early stage investing right now. And I was just checking out our pipeline, and like, boy, there just aren't that many European early stage companies that fit our thesis. And we have, and then maybe here's another amazing transition slump, but we have 3 UK companies already in the portfolio.
No.
So is there a big difference between the EU and the UK in this sense?
Yeah, London is the tech, and in particular the fintech hub of
that's
Europe.
where the 3 come. Yeah, obviously.
Yeah.
That's where they
So
are.
if you are interested in fintech, London is the place to be. And if you're interested in biotech, Oxford, Cambridge are the place to be in Europe. So that's where the UK. I'm German. I live in the UK now. I'm married to an American. So I always think of the UK as kind of like the best mix between Europe and the US. And that goes for its economy as well. We have the same kind of incompetent politicians as the Americans, but are as kind of home towards Europe as we can. And when it comes to innovation and venture, big ventures, I would say we are much better in the UK than the rest of Europe, but obviously by no means close to what the Americans can pull off, or the Israelis for that matter.
One of the things that we've been going back and forth on for a while is like just the weird lack of coverage of companies in Europe, right? Like it really, like, if you look at our data information infrastructure over here, like, a mid-cap company reports earnings and there's like 90 different news releases and all sorts of other stuff. Even as an FT subscriber, even as a Europhile, I don't really get that much news about it. What is going on? Is no one paying attention to European companies? Why might that be?
Well, yeah. So if you're not that glamorous, then the journalists and the media in general isn't really that interested in you. It's like so ASML is kind of glamorous for our standards. Especially since the introduction of the Chips and Science Act in the US, where ASML now can't deliver its most advanced fabs to China. And so kind of these kind of semiconductor companies got caught in the maelstrom and in the kind of ongoing conflict between the US and China on high tech and semis. But other than that, who likes to hear about about a mining company, or who likes to hear about a brilliant industrial company that makes the best dentist drills in the world?
Mm.
I mean, it's super sexy, okay?
It's real good. I mean, literally, it makes you sexier.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
it's awesome. But
What, great teeth. That's a big part of sexiness.
yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you. But it ain't an iPhone.
No, that's true.
But
Okay.
you guys also don't really have much of a sell side research infrastructure anymore.
That has become, I mean, that is where the regulators in Europe have basically shot themselves in the foot in 2018. Because so for the uninitiated, especially in the US, we have introduced MiFID in 2018. And with MiFID came what is called research unbundling. So if you are an institutional investor, if you're a pension fund, if you're a fund manager, you can no longer pay for investment research through trading commission or other what is called soft dollars in the US. You have to pay for it as a separate line item that reduces your profits. And guess what happened? All the fund managers and all the institutional investors started thinking about, why do I really have to pay that much for research? To the point where today, I just heard that statistic about 6 months ago, so I presume it's still correct. The average fund, the average mutual fund pays about 2 basis points of its assets in research cost.
That's
That is
terrifying.
nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, it used to be something like 0.5%, like 50 basis points, and we're down to 2. And the end result is that brokerage these days is called brokerage because we're all broke. And the end result is we're all kind of shutting down coverage, especially for small and mid cap stocks, because you can't make it work financially. And the end that then leads that you have less coverage, less efficient markets, and less liquid markets, and things just get into a death spiral because we have less liquidity. People are, especially the large institutions, are not interested in investing that stuff, and so you kind of have even less investments there. It's all dominated by retail investors more and more, and it becomes a holy mess. Now, the good news is that both the EU regulators and the UK regulators have finally understood that this is happening, and they're both working on rebundling. So they're just basically going in circles.
Beautiful.
Which it gets better because everybody now is afraid of the institutional investors basically saying, oh, well, that's great. I rebundle my research expenses into my trading expenses, but I still want best execution. I'm not willing to pay any more for trading execution than I did before.
Is the journalism problem also a problem and by that I mean the problem is we're losing a ton of journalists that used to hold a bunch of companies and really everybody accountable. Now I've had a lot of conversations with journalists who have got it wrong, but by and large, I think it's a very positive thing for civil society to have a free press. But we're losing the free press right now. And so is it similar in Europe?
It is similar. So the journalist friends that I have who work in Europe basically tell me the same stories that the guys in the US tell me. Namely, it's very much click driven, and that just means instead of kind of pestering the CEO or CFO of company X, Y, Z, by now I think can't stop with company X because that alludes to a specific company.
Yeah, exactly. You have to say X, Y, Z.
Yeah, a certain person who's banned for life from the Free Money Podcast.
Yeah, good. But so company ABC, you can either spend a whole day getting to kind of interview the CEO of that company, or you can just regurgitate what you've read on social media,
Exactly.
and come up with a pretty big kind of tasty headline to make people click on your article. And so the end result is journalists are asked to write more and more articles per day, which gives you less and less time to do proper work. And it's all about the clicks and the interactions online. And that means you're just kind of jumping onto the social media bandwagon.
That serves as a pretty, that and the point about research kind of being hollowed out serves as a useful counterpoint to this thesis that the public markets are just getting more and more efficient. They're on this
Yeah.
endless march towards ultimate efficiency, where there's basically no point in even paying attention to them. I hear this all the time, especially from
Sure.
retail advisors.
Yeah.
As a sell side strategist, how does that premise sit with you?
Well, I like all the people who believe in efficient markets. Who else could I take advantage of?
Exactly.
I mean, markets are getting more and more efficient in, I would say, one particular corner, and that is effectively the largest of the large caps, the mega caps. So, I mean, trying to outsmart other investors when it comes to Apple, Amazon, even Nvidia, is a really, really tough game, and
Yeah.
becomes almost impossible. I would say is impossible, because what do I know that the 100 other guys who are looking in depth at these companies already know, or don't know. But if you go outside the mega caps, market efficiency has actually declined. And that is because the amount, and I've written in my wonderful free Substack.
It really is excellent.
No, this is the kind of banker I'm. Ashby looks very surprised.
No, you gotta plug it.
Yeah,
Don't feel
yeah,
bad.
No, it's just
Especially
that
if it's free
I
and about
thought
money.
you were surprised that it is free, but I'm a banker who doesn't care about money, so that's my problem in life.
Wow.
You're right at home here.
We found one. We finally found one.
It's like, yeah, you found the champagne socialist, man.
That's the alternative title for this podcast, the Champagne Socialist Podcast.
Oh God. But going back to that, so I've written about a study that showed nicely that the problem is, yes, we've got fewer and fewer journalists who do in-depth journalism, but we've got more and more journalism around, more and more articles. And people are so inundated by news or news flow in general that they have to become more and more selective in what they read and what they pay attention to. And that focuses the attention onto those mega caps that grab the headline. And the rest, even if there's stuff written about them, is just very slowly incorporated into the price. And so you can see how the wonderful post-earnings announcement drift, how market share prices react to surprise earnings or surprise misses. Once you go beyond the top 100 companies in the US, it starts to take longer and longer.
Just before we leave that,
yeah.
I just am sitting here, so often I would have told people that the rise in all of these alternative data sets would be a very powerful way of holding some of the small cap. I mean, we started the podcast joking about, brimstone intensity as a metric for, scoring companies. Like, if you think about all of the emerging data, the research isn't there, but the data feels like it's pretty powerful. Do you see that? Finally being brought on board, or do you still have to be so sophisticated to use all that data? So it's just helping the good people stay better.
So if I talk to my hedge fund clients, I mean, AI for them is like really old fashioned stuff.
Yeah.
I've been doing that for 5 years or longer.
Interesting.
And if you so in the hedge fund world, that alternative data is everywhere.
Yeah.
And I get the most interesting questions on that stuff, because the problem is, if you then go to sell side brokerage houses, you tend to kind of have some of it. And then on the buy side, you have none of it most of the time, unless you're highly specialized. Maybe you're a healthcare fund manager or whatever, but other than that, if you're just a kind of a US fund manager, you don't really buy into alternative data. um, and there's that adds to the edge that you can have in the smaller and mid cap space. But the fun thing is, you don't have to be super sophisticated in that space in order to make money.
Okay.
It's the lack of liquidity, it's the lack of information efficiency and efficiency in general that allows you to really kind of make decent returns well above the index. Our firm that I work for is kind of specialized in small and mid cap fund managers, so they're kind of the bulk of our clientele. And the interesting thing is to kind of look at how many of them actually beat their benchmark after costs. That's way more than the 40-50% that you typically get if you just look at Morningstar statistics of all cap or large cap managers.
It's really interesting when you recast these like active management statistics, and like to just kind of like co-sign the idea that by I mean, like, our largest holding is trading at a 35% cash flow yield.
Yeah.
Ugh. That's bananas to me. That should, if the market is even marginally efficient, that should
No,
not
it
be the
shouldn't
case.
happen. It shouldn't
But
happen.
speaking of things that should not be the case, though, you've written a really interesting series about Cassandras, right?
Yeah.
And I bring this up at the risk of getting more questions asked in Latin in our Q&A feature, which is an emerging trend.
Oh my
Because
goodness.
Cassandra, of course, is a Greek myth, and I think if we've already been outed as having alignment with the classics. But what is a Cassandra, and why would you devote an entire series to that?
Yeah. So, I mean, look, I am German, and full disclosure, we Germans are world champions in pessimism. Okay, we're just never sure whether we can defend our title next year.
That's like what I
But
tell people I'm worried about my anxiety diagnosis.
absolutely, absolutely. And I do get it that there are a lot of pessimists out there. And when you look at market pundits, it's really hard to get onto CNBC or Bloomberg TV by saying, "Oh, I think the market is just going to be fine and we're going to make 10% this year." That just doesn't make good headlines, and people don't like to hear that. But if you start talking about how the US debt mountain is going to implode and we're all going to face hyperinflation, or World War III has already started, to quote the headline of a famous Cassandra, who shall remain nameless, then that is what gets you onto the headlines and into social media, etc. And so I noticed that we kind of became more and more pessimistic in the tone everywhere when it comes to financial markets, but also when it comes to politics, etc. It's always the end of the world. And for the longest time, I bought into that. But then I just kind of thought, well, actually, no, most of the time things end up just fine. Yeah, not great, but fine. And so I started to get really annoyed by these people who always kind of have a prophecy of doom and gloom. Yeah, and you look like doom and gloom is coming. Yeah, well, for the last 15 years I've been waiting. Yeah, and in fact, if I look at I've developed over my career these 10 rules of forecasting, which again you can find for free on my Substack. But one of them is the world rarely falls off a cliff.
Yeah.
So if you think that the world is going to end, think again. Because over the last 150 years, my view is we've only fallen off a cliff twice. It's called World War I and World War II. We even number them. And then apart from that, it pretty much was fair sailing most of the time. Yes, there are shit years. Okay, that stuff happens. Called a financial crisis for a reason. But a year and a half later, we were back to normal, and we never looked back. And so what I did basically was write this series to all the most common tropes of these doom and gloom people. And I wish they were real Cassandras, because in the Greek mythology, nobody listens to Cassandra, and that's why the world kind of really goes down the drain. But I think the problem with the financial Cassandras is that people listen to them all the time and then miss out on an awful lot of opportunities. And I've basically written, I think it's 6 parts plus a 7th part on the track record, the performance track record of what happens when you listen to these Cassandras, and it's pretty abysmal. Yeah, I mean, the example I give there is, assume that you have some kind of Taleb-like tail hedge strategy in place. Yeah, so you're buying massively out of the money put options, and assume you have not done that for your entire career, and you do that on the 1st of January 2020. And somebody tells you, over the next 2 years, we're going to get a global pandemic with the economy going into the deepest recession in 300 years, followed by a massive bout of inflation that leads to double-digit inflation, triggered by a nuclear power going to war. You would have said, I want that tail hedge strategy, and I sure as hell think I'm going to make a ton of money going into that tail hedge strategy. As of mid 2021, mid 2022, that tail hedge strategy would have already lost all its outperformance it had in the 2-3 months and the beginning of the pandemic, and would have been worse off than just sticking with the S&P 500 all the time. And that's literally in a world where, if somebody had told you that in advance, you would have said that's the end of the world. I mean, it's the ideal environment for tail hedge strategies. And after 2.5 years, you stop making money with it.
It warms my heart to hear the world's not going to fall off the rails, but it also just reminds me of, we are in this, like, I don't know, cycle of yelling. You know, we talked about this on a prior podcast, how like all podcasts seem to just yell. All journalists are yelling about something to get clicks. Like, isn't that the Fox News business model, to scare our parents into, you know, turning the TV on so that then we, you know,
it's not just the Fox News business model. It's
everybody.
It's CNBC on the and MSNBC and everywhere.
Yeah, that's true.
You know? It's like,
let's share the blame
24-hour
around.
news cycle, and if there is no news, we still have to make something up. Yeah,
and then politicians use it to get out the vote.
Yeah.
You know, like if you look at, like, inflation is down, stock market's at all-time highs, like Biden's approval rating is horrible, in part because he hasn't gotten the message out about the economy.
US economy is, I mean, we now amongst our team have a running joke when the US GDP data comes out and it once again surpasses and beats expectations. And we're like, is there any other way the US GDP works?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm starting to think they're fudging the numbers, but probably if somebody on the right wing now listens to that, they're starting a new conspiracy theory of how Biden is fudging the GDP numbers in order to get reelected. The problem just is the US economy is doing fantastic and Biden doesn't get any credit for it whatsoever.
Exactly. That's what I mean. And you talk to people, they're like, oh, it's terrible out there. It's terrible. Yeah. And it's like, actually, no, it's not.
Well, you know, this is all the more reason to join our evidence-based conspiracy theory Ephanon.
Thank you.
You know, which you know, really is, I think, doing yeoman's work to put humanity on the right path. But you know, I want to ask, like, you know, one of the themes that came up on this that I vocalized on this podcast is that, like, as a long-term investor, I feel often like a jazz aficionado in that, you know, I'm super interested in something almost no one cares about, and there's no good journalism about, and like pretty much everybody else that I know who cares about it is, like, you know, similarly in this weird situation where, like, they can't meet people in the real world that share their interests or whatever. You know, what is your outlook for financial innovation, you know, given that, like, you know, these sort of long-term like the shit that actually matters to long-term investment returns is not the stuff that gets attention, is not the stuff that generates,
Yeah.
clicks, whatever. Like, what does an actual effective financial innovation look like to you?
Oh, see, the problem that I have with financial innovation is that most financial innovation of the last 50 years didn't really change anything, in my view. So if you ask me what are the really important financial innovations of the last 50 years, it's the ATM and the index fund. Um,
Yeah.
Yep.
everything else is pretty much like cosmetics, Um,
I would add the online delivery of statements and confirms.
yeah,
Um,
okay. Well, in the US, yeah, retirement plans in general, just kind of retirement savings plans and stuff like that. That is really, really important. And that's going back to the basics. Everything else is just adding bells and whistles that are sometimes really, really interesting and really good, and sometimes not. Um, what's the financial innovation of the next 10, 20 years? Your guess is as good as mine, but since this is a podcast and since we're trying to attract clicks, let me guess that I'd say the increasing ability to invest in private, non-listed investments of all forms, and to turn that into a broader space. I think that is, I think giving people access to these kinds of things, whether it's venture cap, private equity, in general, I would say growth companies that are earlier stage growth. Um, that I think is a really important innovation. And ironically, as part of that, what we discussed already, namely UK regulators trying to rebundle research payments to make kind of provide more research to lesser known stocks. Um, in the UK, there is a proposition for what is called the Mansion House reforms. And the best thing about that is that both our opposition, the Labour Party, and our ruling Conservative Party have fully embraced that. So no matter what happens in elections, it seems like this is really coming. And the idea is to make sure that small growth companies have enough capital available to grow. Because I'd say that's a general problem, even in the US, as far as I can tell, that the availability of equity capital, risk capital to grow a young, unproven business is really kind of tricky because pension funds have kind of withdrawn or withdrawing more and more from that space. And you're kind of more and more relying on funding by family offices and wealthy individuals, which is one source, but the bigger pool of capital is the conservatively managed, kind of cautiously managed pension funds. And to get them to kind of put more money at risk in and create jobs and growth, and because let's face it, where's the real jobs engine and where's the real growth engine in this world? It's small, fast growing companies spun out of a university and just kind of like creating the next big thing.
From your mouth to somebody's ears. I don't know who, but
Well,
that's awesome.
here's an interesting thing for you guys. When I say to you closed-end funds, you probably freak out and panic and want to run the other way. Because in the US, that is
the
absolutely scorched earth.
cursed marketplace. Yeah, we invest in some, but only only after they've been issued. It's basically exists to
Exactly.
rip off retirees in the
Exactly.
US.
Exactly. So the UK, and I did not know that myself until I moved to the UK 8 years ago. The UK has a really well-developed closed-end fund market, but not just kind of secondaries, but literally unlisted stuff. It is basically you have Neuberger Berman, you've got Blackstone, all these guys have a small pocket of money where they list it as a closed-end fund and allow you to participate in their private equity and private debt holdings, infrastructure stuff. um, uh, solar farms, wind farms, renewable stuff, digital infrastructure, fintech. And nobody knows about them because they all tend to be tiny. Those funds are a couple of 100 million to maybe 1 or 2 billion in market cap. But it allows retail investors and everybody, because they're traded like a normal stock on the London Stock Exchange, allows everybody to gain access to really exciting stuff. To give you an idea, we were talking about fintech. This is not a buy recommendation. I'm not making any financial recommendations. Full disclaimer, please don't sue me.
None of this is, yeah.
But there are two interesting kind of what we call growth funds. One is Chrysalis, which basically is a private equity fund specializing in almost IPO or IPO ready private holdings. So they have big stakes in Klarna, the payment providers, payment fintech, and Zopa, fintech lender, or Augmentum, which is just fintech and is basically the investment vehicle of the Rothschild family that got spun out. And both of these guys have brilliant track records in identifying really good fintech opportunities that are not publicly listed. And you can just basically get access to them and then ride all the way to the IPO and beyond, if you like.
Love it.
That's really fun. I mean, like, I think we ought to let you go and live your life and go to sleep, over there. But thank you so much for, waking us
awesome.
up. To...
Going into the kitchen now and make myself some nice dinner.
Oh, beautiful.
Yep.
Well, sending you guys along, you and your wife Robin, a long distance high five, and
that
Robin,
was so fun, Joaquin.
Yeah, and Joaquim's wife recently left financial services to become a garden designer. So at some point we'll have to have her on the podcast. Maybe in the spring.
You have to. She was a bit shy today, but you have to invite her for a separate podcast.
Yes.
Absolutely.
I think we heard the background.
Yes.
Hi, Robin.
I didn't understand what she said, but she was shouting something.
Okay, perfect.
All right, take it easy, man. Chat to you soon.
All right, bye, Joaquin. Here, I have a little bit. I know we love the the inverse argument, but I have a sneaking suspicion that the defined contribution, if that's a word, of alternatives will make them less attractive to the big institutions, in part because the only way we can bring those private assets into defined contribution plans or publicly traded plans is to develop really good valuation tools that allow you to strike almost real-time valuations.
That's dark.
And a big chunk of why pension funds, endowments, and sovereign funds, maybe not more than 20%, but up to 20% of the reason they're investing in those private equity assets is the accounting treatment.
That's
and the
so
ability,
dark.
Yeah, isn't that dark? But the ability to hold private equity and kind of smooth the performance rather than marking to market on a daily basis. Once you have these publicly traded entities, you have to have really strong valuation tools. So anyway, I do wonder if there's a judo move there that ends up happening where you open up this space to define contribution. For a moment, there's more capital, but then the pension funds have to mark to market on a daily basis that asset. And they're like, well, we don't want to hold it anymore. Anyway.
Yeah, why would we do that? I think, it is like in the US, we actually, at Invest Vegan own a couple of, those types of things, the closed end funds that invest in privates. Here, I think it is, one of the themes that I keep coming back to is that public markets are actually kind of good if you're prepared to actually spend time looking through them. And there's a lot of really interesting stuff there. But the premise has been that private markets are where sophisticated people hang out. And so as a result, it's just not that innovative seeming to be out there. So yeah, I think, perhaps you're right. Maybe we mainstream alternatives, and all of a sudden there needs to be a new alternative for the super institutions.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, time for hard things. What's been hard in your life, my friend?
Well, I pivoted my hard thing for a second because I heard you earlier. I was going to talk about the challenge of putting out dumpster fires with, the challenge of, underbrush management, long-term projects versus short-term requirements.
Yep.
But I just wanted to mention that, like, I heard you say earlier that you're so niche that, like, when you go out into the real world, it's like incredibly difficult to find real people
Yep.
who can kind of vibe with you. And
Yep.
and I had an experience this week. I won't use names, but I talked to this brilliant group, like truly brilliant in this domain. And they were like, well, come and tell us about your work. And I did a 40-minute presentation on my work to 12 people, philosophers, none of them in the finance industry, education, on and on and on. And at the end, I got this question from this person who is brilliant, right? Like the credentials are brilliant. And the question was, I'm having a visceral reaction to your presentation because you're talking about the money guys helping to solve the problem of climate change. And I am worried it was the money guys that actually drove a lot of the logic that has led to climate change. And it's like I had done this whole presentation on the difference between stakeholder-based investment organizations like pensions and shareholder-based. And I guess I just felt depressed for a moment at how hard it is to explain the difference of a pension fund to a hedge fund, to a community that hasn't learned the language, right? There's a whole language that we are presupposing. And even though I can sit down for 40 minutes and do my best, the fact that we haven't trained this generation of people about what this world is actually really material for all kinds of problems we want to solve. And so that's hard, I feel
that is
like Sisyphus really a little bit. I'm pushing that rock up, and every once in a while I got to go start over.
That reminds me of at one point when I was on Tinder in Brooklyn, somebody said they couldn't date me because I was too involved with capitalism. But yeah, I think there really is this like inherent aversion to, and I think like at a high level that keeps the people who should be getting involved in finance out of it. Right? Like, and that sucks.
I mean, that's why I gave the talk, right? Like I went there knowing this was not a finance community necessarily. And I wanted to enlist them in understanding really what this podcast is about, which is like, can we make this kind of fun? Is it possible?
Yeah. Like what if it's actually interesting to research? Like what if there's actually value? What
if the $110 trillion was actually like the incentive to set that up was the government in the beginning? And I had to say to this person who had the question, I was like, remember, this pool of capital, it exists because of a government decision to treat these trusts and endowments and pensions differently than those other actors that you're talking about. And so just remember that like the foundation here is different. It's long-term.
Yeah.
But it felt like maybe I was just talking to myself, I worry about that. Anyway, how about you? What's new?
That's a good segue for a plug. I'm part of this group called Radical Planners, which is for financial professionals that are trying to build a solidarity economy. We're actually doing an onboarding on the 22nd. So if you go on my LinkedIn or you just message us, I'll share the
wow.
And so if you're an interesting financial professional, or if you're a financial professional who identifies with what we talk about, and you can't really figure out how to find a home in the industry, we've got a webinar for you with resources. Hard things for me is we just switched to Salesforce.
Yo. From a spreadsheet?
No, from a dumpster fire CRM. Gabe yesterday said, our new CRM, Salesforce is like it is being trapped in menu hell. I don't know if you've ever used Salesforce, but it's like 97 layers of everything, and you got to configure all this stuff and whatever. We happen to get it from a reseller that specializes in wealth management firms. So like, it's not as much of a hell as it could be, but Gabe goes, it's already more, this Salesforce after about a week is already more of a home than our old CRM ever was.
Yeah.
CRM systems are just a bloodbath.
It's like a horrific thing when like really the business model in the Salesforce ecosystem is consulting led implementation. It's like, it's like right out of the gun. It's like, this doesn't really work. So we're going to need to like marry you with like a whole team that's going to make it kind of work.
Yep. But the interesting thing is that like in the wealth management space, your options are buying these like kind of custom label resold things that haven't been updated in 2 years, or making your own, or getting one of these resold things. Like they're, the options are all bad.
Yeah.
And so like you sort of have to choose the word. And I feel like with CRMs, that's the way it is. Like nobody loves their CRM. They're just, kind of coping with it.
The pension, let's call it the buy side. The pension, sovereign fund, endowment, like these are the people with the capital. By the way, they're not selling anything, right?
Yep.
Like they're all universally frustrated. And stop me if I've told you this before, but I think the next big company I want to build is called Buy Force, not sales, not Salesforce. Because we're not. What we're trying to do as pensions is like triage and manage and like build intelligence around all the shit that's being pushed at us to buy. Like, and so when Sloan comes at me with a product for vegan index funds, like I want to quickly be able to say, how many emails have I had? Who on the team has talked to her? Can I get a reference from Ashby? Like real quick intelligence about things you might want to buy. I think that's the killer product for the pension / asset owner world or the buy side world. You need a CRM because you're still you're building a marketplace here. You need clients to give you money and then you go invest it. Right.
Yeah, exactly. I got to be able to say like, all right, this money's for buying a sailboat in 3 years. Like, here's what you can do with that.
Yeah. The clients don't need yachts, right?
Yeah.
No yachts for the clients, according to the book I read.
It's a famous Wall Street aphorism. Where are the clients' yachts? But yeah,
I think it was also a book. Oh yeah.
By Fred Schwed. But yeah, so here's, time for the Dear Ashby segment. If you're listening along, you want to ask a question, whatever's on your mind, just freemoneypod@gmail.com. That's where these come from. And we love answering them.
We don't have it anymore, do we?
Like I sat down at my desk, it was 6 a.m. and all of a sudden we were taping this podcast. What is time? But here's the first one I think is fascinating. Is it insider trading if I buy puts on Boeing while I am inside the airplane as it breaks?
No.
Yeah.
No, it's not insider trading. In fact, that is really a classic form of alternative data. Maybe a little bit more dangerous to collect. The old "I'm on the plane, it's crashing" data set could be part of our brimstone category.
That's that's a really valuable venture-backed data set. I mean, you have all kinds of kind of asymmetric insight there.
Insider information is not for people inside the planes. It's for people inside the organization and bound by a variety of NDAs and rules and things. If you're just a client, actually, like, you can base your investing on your client experience. You can even do crazy things like count the number of, semi trucks rolling out of a facility and use that in order to make a prediction on revenue. The observable in the environment is, interestingly, fair game, and hedge funds use that all the time. So, if the door blows out on your airplane, by the way, I can't believe nobody died on that. It was so lucky.
I know.
Like,
it's like, and by the way, what a just like, great, case in point for the value of industrial policy, right? Like there's a CEO who drew a straight line between the Boeing nonsense and the merger of Boeing and McConnell Douglas back in the 90s, which basically created a national champion and eliminated competition.
Interesting.
But yeah, I love to gather data from my clients. I have a client who's a, kind of a purchasing manager at a large firm. And we were sort of chatting about what's going on in his life, what he's thinking about. And he's like, is this insider trading? And I'm like, no, man, this is like, we in the industry think of this as a mosaic, where like you're getting all of these random different pieces of data, and, it's my job to assemble it into a mosaic. But like, if I'm talking to somebody who has, marginal influence in a teeny process, that's just good research. That's not insider trading.
There's something that like it's material non-public, and so the
Yeah.
key word is material.
Yeah.
And have you been entrusted with some material piece of non-public information? Generally, the burden is on the person who holds that information to keep
Mhm.
its confidentiality. Obviously, like if you're paying them a bribe to give it or something, which I think, we've seen cases like that. But yeah, I think anything you're observing, once you're talking to executives of publicly traded firms, you start to be like, hey, don't tell me anything. Let's not end up in the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah, like and if what you do if you wind up in that situation, you don't want to deal with it, is you just send an email to a journalist, or to a manager or something like that, and say, hey, here's this thing. I don't think I should know it, whatever. But yeah, like it's I've been in like a hotel lounge sitting next to a CFO of a public company and having them say stuff that is material non-public.
Holy cow!
Yeah. Here's the next question. This is like
Hit me.
amazing. I don't know how much this person listens to the podcast. I gave my boyfriend $25K so that he could day trade, and he lost $500. I feel like he has betrayed my trust.
Oh my god! There's
What
so
should I
much
do?
going on here. There's so much going on here. In I did a 720 in my brain when I read this question. I was like one of these, skiers doing flips. First of all,
Flipperoo.
what does this are we giving, boyfriends and girlfriends huge amounts of cash to day trade?
It's it's the emerging manager landscape.
Oh my Lord. Second, it's really hard. So try to answer this seriously, okay, which I want to do because I respect all the listeners who take the time to put it in. First of all, it depends. Did you establish some sort of a strategy that you wanted this partner to pursue? What did the benchmark actually do? Which implies that you even had a benchmark. Over what time horizon?
Yep.
My initial reaction was to say, oh, you only lost $500? Like that's
Same. Yeah, like,
pretty good.
for
Pretty
day
good.
trading. Like
Yeah.
that's a like a pretty low percentage thing. That's literal gambling.
Yeah, it's literal gambling. I mean, it's like going and saying like, man, I really thought the Washington Generals were going to beat the Globetrotters this time. Should I be pissed that the Washington Generals didn't win? It's like,
My boyfriend
no.
has no luck. I think he's betrayed my trust.
Yeah, so go easy on yourself because you're clearly learning about it, and like what is a real strategy to deploy capital to generate return. And then also, your partner sounds like is getting some of the financial advice off of TikTok. But frankly, like I think you should be high-fiving each other that you're walking out of here with $24.5K.
I would call that tuition. Yeah, like a
Yeah.
$500 tuition payment.
Holy shit, I've paid more tuition in financial markets than that.
Yeah,
Holy cow. If you can just say, oh crap, trading is a fool's errand and we should become investors.
Yep.
Ooh, what's an investor? Well, an investor is somebody who actually buys and holds these things for long term, reads annual reports, votes proxies, engages in the company, has a view, a belief. A trader is just looking at volatility and pricing and trying to sneak in and out. That's gambling.
Yeah. It's like activity versus progress, basically.
Yeah.
Here's the last question. This is really interesting to me. Uranium prices have quadrupled in the last 3 years.
Man.
Does uranium count as a sustainable source of fuel? I wonder if this person is trying to do the thing where the line has gone up and they're trying to justify it.
Interesting. Uranium is technically non-renewable.
Yep.
Okay.
And it's a bitch to extract. A lot of water goes into it.
It's a bitch to extract. There's a chance, by the way, it could become almost renewable if we can get it out of water. Because I think in seawater, there is uranium in seawater. It's just a pain. That is also a pain in the ass. But at least it's been demonstrated to be in seawater. So I think people sometimes think, oh, like uranium is just like the sun. It's not quite like that. It is non-renewable, but it's more sustainable in the sense that when we're talking about these things, what we're often proxying for is carbon emissions. And uranium is not adding to the carbon emissions footprint, but it isn't endless in the same way that wind, tidal solar, all these things
Yep.
that we think of as traditional renewable energy. So I don't know if that answers the question, but
I think, yeah, it's a good distinction between, sustainability as viewed in the narrow lens of carbon and actual sustainability.
yeah.
Anyway, what do you got for me in the gardening tips landscape?
I'm working on being super buff right now, so I'm going to the gym a lot.
I could tell. I could tell. I could see your abs from here.
I mean, look, people getting buff at the gym. So I've been eating a few more eggs. Okay, King of transitions. Okay, first of all, king of transitions here. So I've noted that I've been putting a lot of eggshells in my compost.
Oh, yeah.
And I had this flash of my childhood as I was doing that to my mom saying, would you crumple those eggshells up and go put them in the garden? And I was like, I swear to God, I spent my entire youth taking my eggshells and putting it into the damn garden because my mom
suddenly make a whole lot of sense to me.
Do you have that vibe too? Like, I think our parents this was like how they did fertilizer. And so I went and I Googled, like, what was the point of that? And so ultimately it has calcium, potassium, magnesium, phosphorus, sodium, no brimstone, but all those other things, which are fertilizer equivalents or alternatives. Eggshells can be mulch. But the one thing that I thought was fun was it's a pest deterrent.
Yep.
The texture of the eggshells deter the soft-bodied insects from going around your plants, like snails, which snails are a pain in the butt sometimes. Yeah.
I'm surprised it didn't mention that earthworms love them.
That did not make it.
If you're gonna do actually, like, I bet your kids would love it if you did vermiculture. Like if I had kids under the age of like 14, I would absolutely have a worm bin because I mean, come on.
Yeah, it's real fun.
But eggshells are like the one thing. So if you eat a vegan diet, like the one thing that is a risk to the worms if you have a worm bin is that you need to get some eggshells in there. But
you go out and find eggshells and
you got to go find an egg buddy. But yeah, like it's if you've got a nice supply, I mean that's
So I've been eating a lot. So what I'll do for you, Sloan, is I'll set some of my shells aside, send them out.
Just drop them off.
I'll put them in the post.
What
do you got?
Just hold on to them for me.
I will.
My tip is so traditionally. It's thought that the only time that you can plant bulbs, the latest you can plant bulbs is kind of October, November, December, right? But in a world of climate change, I mean, here in Utah it's 55 degrees today, right? Yeah. And so like I had kind of slacked on my bulb planting. I'm a big fan of buying bulbs at a discount in the spring, when they tend to be pretty readily available at any shop. And I just sort of forgot about them. But like bulbs are one of the like lower effort, high impact things you can do for your garden.
Yeah.
And they show up really, really early in the year. So you'll actually see like most bulbs will be, kind of spring bloomers like tulips, and whatnot. I just planted a bunch of muscari, which are, incredible little plants that you can actually crush to make a purple drink flavoring. Yeah. But yeah, like,
super fun.
It's so cool, and they look like little fairy, houses.
Fun.
But yeah, like bulbs are like I think one of the more neglected areas, and if you have a big space where you can allow them to just kind of hang out and chill, like the fussy way to garden involves digging up the bulb every year, putting it in the refrigerator, basically being an asshole about it. But if you're like, just down to chill, you can actually allow them to naturalize.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. I'm on year 3 of my massive bulb planting I did 3 years ago during COVID. And the spring is amazing now.
Yeah.
They do not go well, and we're in California, so we don't have to worry about frozen soil. But it's pretty incredible. These bulbs come back and they surprise you. You're like, there's nothing down there. And then you see this little green shoot coming up, and then you get this gorgeous flower.
Yeah. It really is like one of the cooler things you can do. And it kind of creates just a nice cadence to the garden. But anyway, that's my tip.
Great tip.
Yeah, just the tip. I think that's all we have for this episode, except for just hyping up the Free Money Awards next week.
Free Money Awards, get in touch. Get in touch if you got any big ideas. And we should yell in podcasts.
Yellen podcast. Yeah, Janet Yellen, the podcast.
All right, we love you
all.
guys.
Thanks for tuning in. Bye.
Bye.